I was going across the street. There was a diner there. It wasn't Ships. It was the other one. Anyway, I get into the elevator, and there's two people in the elevator. It's Jaco Pastorius and Stanley Clark. So I don't know if that was that was a sign to quit.
Oh my gosh!
Or a sign to be inspired.
That's amazing.
And
that's 1980.
Yeah. And no, this is probably 78 or 79 because I hadn't moved here yet. So that was touring here.
Welcome to episode 54 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. On the episode is David Schwartz. David Schwartz is a composer, mainly working for television shows. His big first one, the first television show that he started working on was Northern Exposure, the television show from the 90s. He will speak about that. He has gone on to work with Arrested Development, Veep. What else has David worked on? He's worked on a bunch of stuff. Beverly Hills 90210, Running Wild, Stupid Man, The Good Place, Two of Us, Reaper. Like he stays really active as a composer for television, and we're going to talk about that. David is also a bass player, so we will also speak of that, and we will talk about his time at Berklee as well. And before we get to that, we need to talk about D. Lakin basses. I'm always talking about D. Lakin basses, right? Don't we always need to talk about D. Lakin basses? That just seems like a thing I do. Dan Lakin over at D. Lakin basses can build the bass of your dreams. Hit him up. Check out what he's up to. He's always doing things. I know I say that a lot. If you listen to the podcast regularly, you're going to hear me talk about all the things Dan's up to. Dan stays very active. We can all just talk about that. Dan stays very active. He is, I know I've talked about the amp that he's doing work, amp companies he's doing work with. I am playing the Demeter VTBP-M-800D. Right? You got all that? I will never stop talking about what a long product name that is. You can check those out. Demeter Amps. He's also working with Trickfish, a couple other amp companies. Go to dlakinbasses.com. Check out the basses. Check out the amps. All fantastic stuff. D. Lakin Basses. TrickfishAmps.com. Trickfish has a new product called the Trilobite, which is a dual channel preamp. If you've listened to the podcast and listened to me talk before, I've been playing the Minnow, which is the single channel preamp that I absolutely love. Use it on all my gigs, use it on all the home recording stuff. Now they have the dual channel preamp. So if you are a doubler or you play, two different electrics on a gig, and you want different gain structures for each bass, use the Trilobite by Trickfish. You can also use the promo code TheBassShed for 10% off anything Trickfish related at trickfishamps.com. Check out the Trilobite. Everything you need for the double bass can be found at lemurmusic.com. I was just down there a few weeks ago, got to check out the new facility, their new showroom. A bunch of cool basses there. Got to speak with the new owner, who's going to be on a podcast episode coming up about all the things in the works that Lemur is up to. Man, she's making such a strong presence in the community down there in San Clemente, California. Music venues are popping up, and her involvement with those. There's going to be a recording studio on site there. There's going to be a rehearsal space. There's in-shop luthier. All the basses that they sell, all the accessories that they sell for the bass. I picked up a couple for myself while I was down there hanging. Pretty stoked about that. I like buying bass stuff. Stop by lemurmusic.com and check out everything you need for the double bass. As I mentioned, David Schwartz is on the episode today, and David Schwartz is a bassist and composer. I think he works, he's very active as a composer, very, very active as a composer. You can go to his website at thebassshed.com/podcast/David Schwartz. I'll have a link up there where you can check it out and read more about the things he's done and things he's doing. Instead of me just reading you his website right now, go check it out. Go check it out for yourself. Brilliant stuff he's doing. And I was I'm always been fascinated by composition. I've done a little writing myself. I had a quartet back in the day that I did some writing for. That was a lot of fun. I did arrangements for a short film that won at a film festival. I wrote for a feature-length movie that was solo upright bass. So I wrote all that and performed it. And actually I got an email today that they won another award somewhere. I don't know. Like, I didn't read the whole email. Sorry, film people. I didn't read the whole email. I kind of read the subject line and then skimmed through the rest a little bit. It's a really long email. So that's cool. It was cool to be a part of that. And the composition process is fascinating to me. And I loved writing to visuals. And so it was cool to talk to David, right? The guy doing the thing. About it all. And we talk about his history and what he's still doing as a bass player as well. And we'll talk about his career as a television composer. So, instead of me, again, just reciting his website to you, let's hear it from the man himself. Here is my talk with David Schwartz. What have you been working on?
Well, right now, I'm doing bass tracks for a friend of mine, Larry John McNally, and he says we've been in a band for 20 years, but it's different. We have, but like some years there's 20 gigs and some years there's one, and he's a wonderful songwriter. Songs with Bonnie Raitt, the Staples, Rod Stewart, and we've always had sort of some kind of acoustic band where I only play acoustic bass with him, so all the basses are out because I figured, instead of getting better on one bass, I'd try 5 today. I actually have 4 upright basses in the studio now.
Really? Yeah. What are they? What are the basses?
There's my oldest one is probably Italian, and then there's a French one from Carlitos Del Puerto, who I bought from him a couple of years ago. And then this one in that corner is also possibly French. It doesn't belong to me. Okay. But when I was growing up in Long Island, my best friend's father was a bass player. Okay. And he just thought of me as an annoyance, I believe. But not like, I'll mentor young David. Yeah. But maybe that was his way of doing it. But he came home, and he was a big session guy in New York, and he had played with everybody. I won't go through his whole credits, but he was quite astounding. And he announced that he had found the bass that solved life because it's so small. Yeah. And it fit in his trunk, because then you could have a Pontiac Bonneville that had the trunk the size of a normal car now. And it really is. It's really loud and punchy, but I haven't managed to use it for everything. And so I started out recording with that today, and then went to just my very average, this one here, which is just a Czech bass, not that old. It's just, I don't know, it just got that Pitts thing, Yeah, it's got that. They all have, you have different strings on all of them? For like, you have different setups. Some have Arco strings. They all became pretty much the same string. Because I just sort of one string. I hate changing strings, but I do it too often. And, sure. But yeah, this one, if I have a gig or whatever, I'll do that. Cool. And then I'm trying to get to today a project that I co-wrote an album with Julian Coriel. Do you know Julian at all? Me and Julian used to play duo every Sunday night for probably about 8 months up in North Hollywood. So you know how extraordinary a musician he is. He is fantastic, and I'd probably like to think some of those talks that I had with Julian were the impetus for this whole podcast. Wow, he's also quite brilliant, and he's amazing. But I'll tell you a short story that when the pandemic started, I get bored quickly when I don't have real work, and I didn't at the beginning. And so I was just sending tracks to different friends of mine. Isaiah Gage, a cellist, David Gage's son, and to Julian and Larry Goldings, a couple other people. And, they're normally my heroes, but I said, let's write something, and I would just give them a track, and there was no instruction. Okay. So most people did what they did and sent back something or didn't get to it. But Julian, the next morning, there was a fully formed song. Yeah, of course. Him singing lyrics. Right. And guitar playing on it. I said, this is cool. He said, send me another. Yeah. So now we have a 14-track album that I'm feeling the onus of finishing it. It's not going to happen today. Sure. But the tracks went super fast, and then getting them mixed has been slow because of me and because of the mixer schedule. And we've been adding my daughter to vocals on it. Oh, okay. Here's the real story. Julian is singing, and if you know Julian's voice, it's a beautiful voice.
Yeah.
The voice on all these tracks was sort of like Tom Waits meets Leonard Cohen, which is beautiful too, but not what you associate with Julian. Very low, very gravelly, not really sustaining notes. And then a couple of months ago, I called him. I said, "Hey, this one track, there's a lot of noise. You think you could sing this part again?" He says, "Oh, I don't know if I can go back to that because that was my COVID voice." I said, "What's that?" Well, that's when I had COVID. Now, I have to tell you, I was talking to him, a few times a week during this whole time.
Yeah.
And now he lives in Chicago. And I said, "You had COVID?" And he goes like, "Oh, yeah, didn't I tell you? I told you that, right?" So he had it pretty bad. I don't know if I should be talking about his medical condition. But anyway, he's fine now. And back paying with Alanis and a lot of other people. And on the last track, I said, it still needs something. I don't want to play more keyboards on it. Why don't you play guitar on it? And he says, "No, I think it would ruin it." So we have no guitar on the whole thing. Or if it is, maybe I played on one. But anyway, so that project, it's really cool.
Nice.
It's all lyrics, and him and my daughter Lissy sort of have worked together and things, as has Lissy's worked with us in John McNally's band. So so now my next thing is getting her. She's living here with us during the pandemic and post right now. So I just have to get her up to the studio and get her on more tracks. Some tracks will not have her.
Nice.
Vocal tracks, and that's what I'm working on now.
Does she do music outside of working with you on these projects?
Yeah, she's a successful singer-songwriter. And had songs in the movie, oh God, now I can't remember the name of it, but Shrek and Parenthood and Twilight.
Okay,
and
those are all good. Those are all good films.
Very young, and she started out. She always sang as a kid, and she started writing music about that time. But in Arrested Development, she would come in and sing stuff, and I realized she could sort of do anything, and in a French accent or an English accent, and sing in any style, and so it was just great having a great singer here.
Yeah.
And and it's continued. And I've always not always. She's had some big producers. Mitchell Froome produced 2 records ago. And then she came back to where she could boss the producer around. And she's not, I use that as a joke because she's absolutely a delight to work with.
Yeah.
And so we always have a lot of her stuff to work on. We just did one song for a charity event for Right Girl, which is women writers of all types. By all types, I mean screenwriters, novelists, singer-songwriters. So it was a big event on Saturday to support Right Girl LA. And you can look it up on either my site or Lissy's sites. But Amanda Gorman, the poet laureate who spoke at the inauguration, she was one of the main speakers, and Lissy was the only musical performer. So we did one song, and we enlisted a friend who we'd never played with before, Grace Kelly, to play sax on it. Okay. So it was the 3 of us, and we did it here in the studio. It's the biggest session I've had in the studio since all the craziness started. Yeah. There's 3 of us, and we had a cinematographer and an engineer, so there were 5 people. Okay. Yeah. And my main thing is I didn't want to engineer and play at the same time. And if I
just wear one of the hats. Yeah, you don't need to wear both.
I do it a lot. If I can sit and play electric bass at the console, but this was on video, so I didn't want to be running back and forth and
doing that whole thing.
That was a great day. We had a great day.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit. You were a Berkeley student. You were a student at Berkeley. Maybe is a better way of saying it. Did you graduate?
Back a lot. What?
Did you graduate Berkelely?
No. Yeah. You're not supposed to, right?
Exactly. That's why I always ask.
Massively uncool to graduate. I'm sure,
That's if you. Yeah, that's how you failed. Is if you actually.
I haven't fired people. I've hired a lot of graduates of Berkeley. Since I've been a composer. Yeah. And now it's you finish. Especially if you're going to come out and be in composing or film scoring and stuff like that. And they're all massively talented, and they learned, it's a very different place than when I went to school there, but it was. Sure. So, after 2 years, I took a gig subbing for a much better bass player for mine, than myself, Chip Jackson, who's incredible, and he had a conflict between Buddy Rich and the Glenn Miller Band. So I went out with the Glenn Miller Band, which was an unbelievable learning experience, great players who were not too happy about being on the road, as I remember it. And And I really didn't. It's funny because maybe from this, a lot of my writing career has involved writing a lot of Duke Ellington era jazz and big band kind of stuff, or small ensemble and Django Reinhardt. And here was the real, I mean,
this was it.
It was post Glenn's life, but it was fun, and it was terrifying and fun. And then after that, I went back to Boston, gigged for a couple of years, and then moved to Woodstock, New York, and then back to New York City, where I'm from, or Long Island, New York City.
Were you studying bass at Berklee or composition? Yeah,
well, okay, let me turn this off right now. So, yeah, I was just that kid who, music seems like fun, but like in my last year, well, I was actually... I went my first year of college to the School of Visual Arts as a photographer. Okay. And I sort of discovered photography. My whole family, my mother, my father, my sister were all visual artists. So that was just sort of the way we rolled. And, by being a musician, it was different, which is, probably a good thing for me. And so but in my senior year of high school, I fell in love with photography. And at the same time, I decided I wanted to try the upright bass. I'd always been in bands, and and I decided I would, join the school jazz band and orchestra as an upright bass player. And I really, I could play because I played electric bass and I sort of had a natural something, but I couldn't really read very well. So in the orchestra, there were two bass players, and the kid next to me could read, but really couldn't play very well. So I think the two of us formed, almost a half of a bass player.
Right. You guys enabled each other to make up one.
So, so wait, I'm trying to remember the order of this now. So I went to the School of Visual Arts, and I started studying upright bass. And then at the year of photography, I decided it was really great. I love photography, but I didn't want to be myself in a dark room for the rest of my life. And it turns out music went the same way. I have a lot of light here, but we all spent years in windowless studios. Right. So I was very lucky after a long time to build a studio that has tons of light. Yeah. And so I went to Berklee as an electric bass major because I didn't think I could get in as an upright bass player. Okay. Berklee, through some snafu of bureaucracy, put me in the upright bass department. So I got there, and there's head of the department, Bill. I'll get it for you. Anyway, now his name's going to come back to me. Anyway, he was wonderful, and we immediately liked each other. But I said, I'm really not supposed to be here. He says, you can play. This was the first year they were offering electric bass as a major. He says, we don't know what's going to happen there. No one's ever tried to teach this. Yes. Stay in the upright, you'll learn more. So I did. And that was life-changing because then, instead of going to any classes at Berklee, I just shed and studied. Right. Trying to catch up with all the really great players there. Yeah. And Bill was just the most inspiring teacher. And, he wasn't a jazz guy. He wasn't a classical. He just could sort of do anything. Yeah. And there was even
a good teacher. Like he understood how to inspire and motivate and. Right. Yeah.
Because I don't know if you've had this experience. I've taken a couple of lessons over the years with some very famous players who were inspiring and motivating because they were playing in front of you. Right. They didn't really, I could see there wasn't a curriculum or a way to get to the next stage.
Right. Or I've done it where you feel like you're just a part of their machine. Like you're just they're just going to start their spiel with you. Right. And it's not necessarily personalized to you. They're just, well, here's the so-and-so algorithm of bass playing. Right. Well, after Berklee, when I moved to Woodstock to be in an R&B pop band or whatever it was, I realized Dave Holland lived down the road in Woodstock. So Dave was my favorite bass player of the time, and I asked to study with him, and I think we only got 10 lessons in a couple of years because of his road schedule and mine, touring with this band. Sure. But he was everything. First of all, he was incredibly inspiring, incredibly giving and nice. And he also
It's very strict. He had a method, which I didn't think I would relate to, but it was like, no, let's go back to playing one open string. When you get that, we'll move on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. And, he taught harmony and bowing and everything. And
sure.
And if you were around Dave, you were realizing he was practicing 8 hours a day still. And he was Dave Holland at the peak of his career.
Yeah.
Probably still is. And I started to think, well, can I do this? I don't last that long practicing.
Right.
I can do a couple hours on a good day, but, now way less that I'm a composer. But
sure.
Yeah. So where are we from there? So eventually...
So you're in Woodstock studying with Holland. What brings you out to Los Angeles, and what year was that?
1980. Still ancient history. In 1970, so I was in a band called the Striders, which was Robbie Dupree's band. Mm-hmm. Hot Rod Hearts and Steal Away. Robbie had 2 big pop hits after he left that band. He moved out here and became a big pop star. And he's a really cool artist now. I mean, his songs are great. And so I sort of said, okay, I'm going to New York City. I'm leaving Woodstock. As soon as I did, I got a call from John Hall, who was the leader of Orleans. And that band had broken up. And he said, well, will you come back to Woodstock and start, you'd be the first player and we'll find a band together.
Okay.
So it was sort of like the opposite direction I wanted to go. But John was so great. And definitely another mentor on how to run a band and just how to really work at being an all-around artist is incredible. So that was a great band, and we toured for a couple of years, and usually opening up for Little Feat or James Taylor or Bonnie Raitt. And so there were great shows to be on, and seeing how those people did it.
Yeah.
The last gig I did with John was Madison Square Garden, the No Nukes Festival. We did 5 nights at the Garden.
That doesn't suck.
It was like Springsteen and Paul Simon and Chuck.
Oh man,
I can't even remember. Everyone wanted to be part of that, and we did a couple of giant downtown New York and Washington D.C. outside performances, like 250,000 people. Which, strangely enough, I get more nervous, in a club in New York or L.A. when everyone is there, like
right, and you can see their eyeballs.
Yeah, and who they are, and
right.
But like being on a big stage is so much adrenaline, so that was really fun. And at the end of that, I had now come to California twice touring with him, and I was fascinated. And I always assumed, as a classic New Yorker, I wouldn't like California. I had an image that wasn't based on anything, but like within an hour, I was loving California. And I stayed at the Sunset Marquis. And I remember getting off the plane and going to the hotel and being fascinated with the Sunset Marquis and saying, oh, I'm going to go get some food. So I was going across the street. There was a diner there. It wasn't Ships. It was the other one. Anyway, I get into the elevator, and there's 2 people in the elevator. It's Jaco Pastorius and Stanley Clarke. So I don't know if that was a sign to quit.
Oh, my gosh.
Or a sign to be inspired.
That's amazing. And that's 1980?
Yeah. And no, this is probably 78 or 79 because I hadn't moved here yet. So that was touring here. And then I had met my now wife in 79, and somehow we decided we would go to California and check it out. All these people had said, hey, man, we need guys like you. We need New York type bass players. You should come out here. It'll be a lot of work. And they were being nice, but there was no work in 1980. There was a tremendous financial drop in the music business, and there were the mudslides of 80. It was... I don't know why I didn't just give up and go back to New York in 3 months. Because I was either doing really terrible bar gigs or I had a job selling computer supplies in a company that after 2 weeks I realized, oh, this is like fraud.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be here. So I got out, and and those years were tough. I mean, I was in Michael Ruff's band, which was incredible. Michael always had the best bands in town, and we had a regular gig every week at my place in Santa Monica, which doesn't exist anymore. But it was a great play. I would live for those Saturday nights. And then Michael's band became Vonda Shepard's band, so we had those 2 gigs. And then I guess around in 1984, my dad passed away, and I went back to New York for 6 months. When I came back, I realized I had to do something different, I mean, I'd gotten pretty far playing gigs and demo recordings and some records, but it seemed it was going the other way. There were a couple of, there was already Nathan East and Neil Steubenhouse and the Brothers Johnson, and people were doing those sessions, and
Right.
it was very specialized.
Was that a big focus of yours? Did you want to get into the session side of things, or did you want to get into the road guy thing?
No, I had done the road guy, and I would have taken it if there were great ones, and I did a few out of Los Angeles. But I sort of grew up. A lot of my friends' fathers were session guys in Long Island, and I thought, well, I could do that, but it really didn't work that way for me. And I did sessions, and then sort of everything changed as it became all demo studios and drum machines, and the world was changing in a big way. And even a few years after that, I'd had my son, and then my daughter came along, and right about that time, I started getting into composition.
Yeah.
And that was an accident, really, too. I had done one job, a film called Skeeter Wings, for a friend of mine who passed away a few years after that. And, he didn't even ask me to do it. He asked me if I knew someone. My wife said, it should be you. And I said, okay.
Yeah.
But, at that point, I was trying to be a producer and trying to be a bass player. And I figured, well, I know pretty much about those two jobs. Mm-hmm. And it's not happening enough. So why would I try something that I don't know anything about? Which maybe is a good lesson that you should try, if you had a feeling. So I did his film, and his film had no budget. I think we split an $800 Roland sampler.
Yeah.
That was the budget, I got to pay for half of my sampler so I could do the thing. But
so you could do the gig, yeah.
Yeah, and he had, by the time he got back and told me he wanted me to do it, I'd sent him a demo that he really liked. There were really big name composers doing it, so there was something there. And then his film never got finished. He just ran out of money, and he took another directing job, directing some kind of B movie. I should say, I don't know what movie it was, but
yeah.
And then, I was very motivated. I wanted to be a composer, and in those days you sent out cassette tapes to people who were in the business, so somehow I found a list of people who were in the business. You send out 150 cassette tapes and no one ever answers.
And so what's on these cassette tapes? Because without a visual context for the music,
right.
What are they listening to? Or what are you writing to? I'll
say to this day, now that I've been a composer for many, many years, decades, no one ever asks me for a visual. Maybe 3 times in 25 years, someone said, oh, can we see something to video? I don't know why. It's just not part of the business. What they want often is to hear the music that you haven't written yet for their film, which is kind of crazy because you want to write something totally original, and yet they have no way to base that. And so, agents will ask me for, they'd like something, with mandolins and Pitt's viola that's, not quirky. That's a bad example, but, it's very specific stuff.
Do they speak more when you get these notes or you get hit up about gigs? Do they talk about the instrumentation, or do they talk about a mood? Like, we want something haunting or something kind of playful. It seems like it would be easier to write the mood.
That's much better. And that's, when I'm in the room with them, that's what I ask for. I just talk about the emotions that are missing here.
Right.
And often it's about that. If usually that's a sign of a better product. They say, look, we have the drama here. Mm-hmm. What kind of music can we do to lighten this up a little bit, or the other way around?
Okay.
We didn't get it as dramatic as we'd like, or just let's give people another thought here. So it's not like see sad, play sad music.
Right.
That can really work. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Need liquid. So I shouldn't say it's always like that, but sometimes I'll get a thing. These people have a TV show. They tempt with the score from blah, blah, blah. And that's the only information I get. So the basic thing is, why don't they hire the guy who wrote blah, blah, blah?
Right. Right.
But contemporaries of mine have said, I got a call. Someone wanted it to sound like Arrested Development, And
okay.
I said, well, why didn't you take it? I said, well, they said they told these producers to call me, and I never got the call. But so you never really know. I think it's different once you get in the room. They need a way, because they're going to get so many submissions from their side. They need a way to cull out and end up with 2 to 10 people that they might meet. And it's really hard. It's totally challenging for them because they're at the very end of their process and maybe doubting what they have in some ways, or just have overthought every possible thing. And it's weeks from being final mix, and they're hiring a composer, and it's often that late. And they know the composer can do a couple of things: make their film a lot better, or make their film a lot worse.
Sure.
And it's easier for it to be a lot worse. So when someone hires you, especially if you haven't worked with them before, there's a tremendous amount of trust involved, and I get it, and
Yeah.
I think we've all been, now that I hire musicians more than I get hired, I realize what the greats have and how I make my decisions.
What is that?
Well,
When I before you answer, maybe yours would be similar to mine, maybe not, because when I go about picking people to play my music, I choose them based on their intuition, where their natural intuition falls within music, not their chops, not their how well they can read, not whatever, how I feel with them when I play and where their intuitive nature lies.
okay, but you're hiring people to play with you. It's a little different.
Yes.
I get that all of it's important,
Right.
and
Agreed.
and it's also hard if you have someone that's great to go out of there and take a chance.
Yeah.
Like if you heard someone playing downtown in front of Disney Hall and they were an incredible classical guitarist, would you hire them to do that R&B bass score or the R&B bass score or the scary movie? They might.
Right.
They might be really great at it. I like to think I can do any kind of scoring, but people have an image of me, and it's not always that. It's based on the shows that I've done.
Sure.
And
do you feel like you've been pigeonholed a little bit because of you've had some big spots?
Yes and no. I feel I've done a real wide variety of stuff, and sometimes people don't know what to do with it. So sometimes I'm the comedy guy. Sometimes I'm the guy who does really interesting shows that don't fit in any category, which are tough because there's probably 20 new doctor or lawyer shows a year, and I never get called for that. In a very long career, I've almost never been called for.
I never done one of those.
Those things stay on the air forever.
Yeah.
I think Arrested Development is really unique, and people love the music, and people love me for doing it, and all that's great. But I don't think people see their show as fitting that music, even though Arrested Development has all kinds of music in the world. And as a contrast, The Good Place, I loved it because I said, I can finally do a show that has a limited palette and has a sound, and every cue would have that sound, and it would be very thematic. But because I think it's a unique show, and I'd like to think it's a unique score, people don't think, let's get that guy who did that. Right. I get more referrals from The Good Place, and it's more recent than I do from Arrested Development, because I think most other comedies don't think of doing that musically what Mitch Hurwitz did with Arrested Development and what we did together. Am I answering these questions?
Yeah, no.
This is go back one. There are players, and I think this is more experience, and I always give the example of George Deering. George is by far the best studio musician in the world, and anyone who's ever worked with him will confirm this. He's also the nicest guy, the best reader, and has an ability to be watching what's happening on the score and score it in real time. Not that he doesn't have parts. There's always a part for him, and then I'll say, hey, let's try something else, add something else. And it's incredible. His gifts are, gifts is the wrong word because he's worked harder than anybody too.
Sure.
He's probably been doing 4 sessions every day, almost 7 days a week, every week for 50 years now.
Okay.
And there's not a working scoring musician or composer who doesn't know him, doesn't want to use him. But he's not known by guitar magazines or by the average person in a band.
Sure.
Even though he's played on more records than most people too.
Yeah.
So when I saw what he could do, I said, and I've learned a lot from him. Now, sometimes I have to, play his part if I don't have a guitarist there for a demo.
Yeah.
And I just tried, how would George do this? And not try to play what he plays, but just sort of what he can add to everything. And he also plays every instrument, so that's a little scary. So that ability, maybe intuitive is good because they have an intuitive feel for the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not trying to bring... they're bringing themselves, but not bringing the wrong part. So,
Right. They're bringing themselves, the part of themselves that works the best for the greater good.
Yeah. And, I mean, with the Good Place, for an example, for all 4 seasons, every week I'd have a string quartet, sometimes an orchestra, sometimes 6 string players, and I'd have George. And usually George was adding stuff that I didn't have there. String quartet had to be great readers. I mean, you don't have a string quartet and say, hey, let's, try stuff now. It would be really cool. I often wish I did have that time to do it.
Sure.
And, when I started, there weren't a whole group of string players who could improvise or play like Stefan Grappelli or like old time country or all those different bluegrass styles. Now there are. And they play everything, and they play in bands. And, when I started, it was Charlie Bicheret and Sid Page, and those guys can still do it, and they're incredible, and I'm always happy to have those guys on any session. But now there's a whole group of players who are very versatile, and, they can improvise, do stuff. I don't do it as a group, but if I want to bring in Isaiah Gage to play cello, I know he can come up with stuff that just wouldn't come out of my palette by itself, or send it to him. Now there's more sending to people.
Yeah, there's a violin player, I'm blanking on his name, Paul Cartwright, that's his name. He's one of those guys. Like, he can play any kind of iteration of violin or fiddle or whatever, but then acoustic guitar, knows a ton of pop tunes, knows a ton of classical rap, like just this Swiss Army knife of fantastic musicianship. It's intimidating. Like then I'm just like on the gig and I'm like, I can play electric and upright. That's cool, right?
Yeah. Well, George, a couple of years ago, the same George Deering, we were waiting for something technical, and he picks up my upright bass. And in about 5 minutes, he was at my level. And I said, "Wait, how long have you played that?" He said, this is the first time. This is fun, and that's it. Like, he's having fun, and he looked like he had a position, and he could navigate the left hand and the right hand. He's getting a sound, and that just doesn't happen. But he's played so many instruments. Sure. That it's kind of, I've seen him play drums. I've seen him play horns. It's weird, and he's so liked. It's a treat. He has a bluegrass band with his wife. For years, they had a gig at Casa Vega, in Burbank, across from the bowling alley, and they're great. And this is the funniest thing. They had their longtime bass player had some kind of issue, couldn't play for a couple of months or something like that. And he was a guy who played a K bass with gut strings, their bass player, and it was great for that kind of bluegrass. Yeah. So I'm telling George a story now, so if I get it wrong, forgive me. But he was at a session and saying this, I got to get someone to sub for my bass player tonight. And Abe Laboriel's there, senior, and says, I'll do it. So George is kind of laughing to himself, I'm going to have, everything. And, I went and saw it a couple of times with Abe Senior doing it, and he was perfect. His solo would still be, all the jumping up and down and the flamenco and all that stuff. But he'd start out in a sort of pentatonic country mode. Yeah. And then he would take it into his thing. Yeah. He was using a 5-string electric bass in a bluegrass band, and he nailed it. Like when it was time to play the parts. Yeah. Just during the song, he was just great. His own version of 1/5, and it's really interesting to see because he didn't have to be. And that's why Abe is also one of the greats of all time and plays film scores and can read anything. And he did an early session when I was still an engineer and producer at my studio, and somebody said, I'm bringing in my bass player, Abe. I said, Abe's the greatest. He's the nicest guy. Another guy, unbelievable personality. And I said, but we have a whole synth bass line. Is Abe going to replace it? And then he goes, no, he's going to double track it. There's this very complicated Moog line that they had worked on for days or whatever. Yeah. And Abe comes in, listens a few times, and just nails it. And there's no flam, and I go like, yeah. That's what those guys can do, Right. That's what makes an A-lister. And he made his tone work with it perfectly. Cool.
Let's fast forward, or actually, I don't know where we are in the story, actually, or the timeline.
It's been like a current movie where it's not in real time.
We're jumping around. How did Northern Exposure, when you wrote the theme for Northern Exposure, that kind of like really put you on the map, right? As far as
this is my first real known gig. I'd done that little movie, and what happened was a friend of the director's had seen the movie, and she's still a good friend of mine, Cheryl Block, called me up and said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember, we met with DJ for the film you did, and I'm doing this new show called North to the Future. It wasn't even called Northern Exposure yet.
Okay.
And we've tried a lot of people. We're not, it all sounds the same to us. Would you try to write something for the theme? And I knew nothing of that world. I just hadn't ever been in that world except for this little tiny film that just was me and the director who'd done it. And it seemed within minutes there was a courier from William Morris with a script. And then I said, this is another realization for me that these people have a real, thing. They're doing a TV show.
Yeah,
and they have
right.
Agents and whatever.
They have people that do things.
So I don't know if you've had this experience, but I didn't really write a lot to that point. I'd written that one thing. I'd never been a songwriter. I'd tried. I would always be, this isn't as good as the Beatles. It's not as good as the band. It's not as good as Stravinsky or Beethoven. Those were like my self-imposed stupid standards. So I wouldn't finish a lot of stuff. And so I wrote the Northern Exposure theme, and I still, if I look back at it, I don't know how. I mean, it is sort of a combination of all my influences, but there's a thing of writing from ignorance or playing from ignorance. The first time you hear a tune, you play the greatest stuff, and the second time, it might not be as great, or it might be better. You don't know. But I liked it, but I thought, this doesn't sound like what TV sounds like. Mm-hmm. And this is now 1990. And so I wrote another piece that it's one of the great losses of my life. I can't find that piece.
Okay.
But it was really terrible. And I thought that's what they wanted. I thought it sounded like a quiz show when I did hear it later, but since then it's just disappeared from my files.
Okay.
And Cheryl came in and she said, "Oh, that's all you got?" I played the wrong piece first. And she said,
that's the one you lost.
Yeah, because she just didn't want to embarrass me at that point, so she asked if I had something else. So I played her the theme that I wrote first. She said, "Oh, that's really good. Let me play that for the creators." And they came back. Josh Brand, who created the show, wanted me to try a lot of stuff, and this is very common with television and film. That I like what you did, but let's hear what it sounds like with mariachi horns. Let's see if we add strings. What if we had different kind of keyboards on this?
Give me every iteration of this kind of idea. Right.
And especially, if you're new to it, and it's still like that now. Yeah. But so I did, and we pretty much came back to the original thing. They were liking the synth harmonica part, which just to me was just the worst.
Really?
I couldn't stand it. Well, it was first of all, there weren't good samples then, and harmonica, it's a feel instrument, and I wanted it to sound not like Toots Thielsman, which would be impossible to do with the synth.
Sure.
I wanted it to sound like Stevie Wonder.
Okay.
And then I remembered that on my friend Larry, who I'm doing bass tracks for right now, on his second record or first record, there was a guy who had that kind of very soulful R&B, and it wasn't Stevie, but he's obviously influenced by Stevie as a harmonica player.
Yeah.
And his name was Tolek Alstad, and he came in to my little tiny garage studio and goes into the little closet that's a booth, and through the microphone would say, "Hey, this is great, you can do it, where are you from?" And he went, "Alaska." And I knew.
That was it.
I had to be the guy.
Yeah.
And before that, I had gone through a couple of harmonica players that were great that just didn't work out for that. And then, that sort of finished the theme. And when Cheryl called me to say she said, we're going to use your theme, I said, great. And she said, so, show up tomorrow, we'll go through the first show, we'll spot it. And I had no idea that the two were connected.
Okay.
I thought I wrote a TV theme, which is all upside because there's a TV show and they're going to pay you something and it's going to be on TV and you have a credit. Yeah. But, saying, show up tomorrow, we're going to spot it. And then you go like, well, I don't know how to do that. Just I'm going to have to write a lot of music under a deadline, but there were extraordinary people, everyone on the show, maybe 7 producers, all who had unbelievable music tastes in every different genre. And what we did, I don't know if then I thought that was weird, but the music was different every week. So we didn't have, I think in the pilot episode, we used the theme once or twice because everything else I wrote wasn't making the cut. But after that, it was different music every episode. Like, can we have a music with a big orchestra? That happened on the 7th episode. I had never done that. And so 65 people to write for, and that somehow I got through that with help from my orchestrator, Phil Giffen, who's still a good buddy, and he conducted. And then shortly before that, I think Josh had said, "Hey, can we have music like the band's stuff?" And I was just like, those were my heroes in New York,
Okay.
That's Richard T. and Steve Gadd and
Yeah.
And I said, "How do you know though?"
Yeah.
So I was really surprised that they knew all the influences, and so I'd try to write something like that, or they'd say something like Coltrane here. Like that doesn't happen in shows now.
No.
I have very varied producers, and I get to write a lot of cool stuff, and they have. But this was particularly, and I think another big part of Northern Exposure was there were two places that played a lot of music. And at first there were only records. Chris's radio show, Chris the DJ, radio show that was sort of based on Chris DeRitis' show in LA. I shouldn't say that, but I think it was. And so he played really eclectic music, and a lot of old jazz and a lot of old country and just really cool music all the time. And then there was a similarly eclectic bar in the town that played music that you wouldn't think would be in a bar in Alaska.
Okay.
It's a sort of wonderful place that people played all kinds of music. So after the first couple of seasons, I started writing a lot of those because there wasn't that much score. So they said, "Hey, can you write something that sounds like this country band, or
right,
something that sounds like Willie Nelson without vocals, or And I would never try to copy anything, but it was really fun to stretch all those styles. And then, once a year or so, there'd be an orchestra, so I got to learn about that, and so it set me up for a very eclectic career. And I think after the 7 years of Northern Exposure, I didn't work for a year, maybe more than that.
Okay.
They didn't have a moose show for me, is what they would say.
Yeah. How did you when listening to the theme for Northern Exposure? I liked the harmonica a lot because it was kind of left of center of what I would think, but it also added this, forgive me if I use the wrong word, almost like whimsical nature to the theme. This kind of playful, approachable aspect to it. And then I started to imagine the theme on any other instrument, and the instrument sold the theme to me.
And the performance, but yeah, I think I did try everything. And
what did you use to lock into harmonica and picking harmonica? Like, what was it? Was it something in the script? Was it this idea or something when talking to the producers?
Yeah, there was a conversation before I wrote it, actually.
Okay.
So I skipped that part, and I'm in the timeline. I did speak to the creator of the show.
Okay.
Who actually our 3 or 4 year old sons were in preschool together.
Oh, crazy.
No, it wasn't great because he said he didn't want to meet me. So, who was he? Says, "Oh yeah, he's a good guy." Like, what if it doesn't work out? That's the way that's the way I was told, at least.
Okay.
Because then he'd have to reject me, and then he'd have to see me at preschool. So it wasn't. Yeah. Oh, what a great connection! This was the opposite of a great connection.
Yeah, like too close to home.
But he could talk music in very artistic terms, and about Ed, one of the characters, he'd say, "Well, Ed's just like you crack his head open with a hammer and a parrot comes out." So that's the kind of notes I would get from him. But about the theme, he said, I think at that point we had both sort of studied or tried to listen to as much Alaskan music, and a lot of it were tribal chants that indigenous to Alaska. I mean, I'm sure we didn't go very deep into that or find as much as we could have, but and we didn't want it to be like that. And so Josh, his best note was go the opposite, which was like, it's kind of like Eno in that way. He'd say go the opposite, just do the opposite thing.
Sure.
And so I said, like, music from Southern cultures, and there was a thing in New Orleans music then, so that came from it, and I'd been listening to a lot of Latin, so those elements came out in it.
Yeah.
Then but and this is hard to really remember, but I think, with my terrible piano playing, I started, playing the bass line against the melody. Bass was the first thing.
Okay.
And I was obsessive about the bass line, like I'm not now, but because I was this frustrated, I wanted to do more sessions here. I was going to make the best bass line and right. Sound for it. It was more about the bass sound. I spent days on it, and there was. It's hard to play, and there was no punching in, and I was using a fretless bass.
Right. So, I remember it being fretless. I don't remember the line, but I remember it being fretless.
Well, yeah, it's very fretless. but I played a lot of years of fretless bass. I think actually, the first time I saw Jocko, I was still living in Woodstock, and he was playing the local Joyous Lake, a bar that I played at all the time. He was there with Pat Metheny and Bob Moses.
Yeah, the Bright Size Life band.
Yeah. And I just, someone said, hey, you should come down to the Joyous Lake. There's a good band tonight, and it was my local town bar. And I heard Jocko, and I just remember like packing up I went home that night and packed up the fretless and put it at the back of the closet. I think some people would be inspired, like,
yeah,
I can find another voice of this, like Pino Palladino, or,
Right.
I'm like, no.
Tony Levin.
Yeah. Or, get friends. And Tony lived in Woodstock too.
Okay.
So, yeah. And anyway, so that sort of explains that. But when I really heard, even with the sample, I could tell what the harmonica would sound like. I probably tried Wurlitzers, and it's still a problem to me when you have music that's not classical and not jazz, and you want a strong melody with a lead instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's hard because, like, every instrument, do we want to play this on electric guitar? No.
Right.
And there are a few Rockford Files, a few TV shows that use the harmonica really well. So
okay.
I had that. I don't know if I was thinking that way, and sort of afterwards it was pointed out to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I still sort of struggle. Should there be a melody, and
versus just like kind of a vibe? Now, between 90, that's when Northern Exposure was out, right? 90 to 95.
Yeah.
Between 1990 and what television has become now, specifically with theme songs, now it's, and I've thought about this before, and I've talked to musician friends about it. Like, when did the TV show theme song kind of turn into this just soundbite a little bit? And I'm like, was it Seinfeld that kind of killed? Because you listen to like Full House, like that had a bridge, that was a long song, that was a thought out piece of work.
12-piece band, on the Sony lot or wherever they recorded it. Yeah, it's a big difference. I think it more came. I mean, definitely Seinfeld being very successful, and Jonathan Wolf did a brilliant job on that.
He did, yeah.
And then we all had to copy his sample bass sound.
Right.
I got into a thing with the producer, and they said, "No, it's a bass." I said, "No, this is a bass. That's a."
Yeah.
You can't have those arguments.
Right.
But I think there was a thing then that networks felt they were losing the audience, for anything. So to have the theme as short as it can, get right into the show.
Sure.
Then, when HBO came along, and then Netflix, they were more like, well, we want to make it a sonic identity. They went back the other way. So there are, like, I wrote the theme for Deadwood, and that's 1.5 minutes. And
okay.
Most HBO dramas are 1.5 minutes. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And, then my newest show, which I wrote the theme, we'll have co-composers, but who are a Tribe Called Red, an indigenous hip hop band, and they're incredible. And my daughter, and the impetus came from my daughter, and we wrote that. It was 21 seconds. That's long for a comedy these days.
Okay.
And because it streams on most streaming networks, you have the option of skipping the intro.
Right.
Which, I wish people would listen to it every time, but if you're in watching 7 episodes in one night, you might.
Yeah, if you're in binge mode, like, okay, I get it. Like,
binge is different, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, and this I don't like at all, is that it on a lot of streaming networks, it normals to skipping the credits.
Mm.
So composers' credits are often on the back end. Sometimes you can get it on the front end. But
yeah.
And or then people hear it on some other service and say, "Oh, there was an end title. We never heard that." And so things like that, change it up.
What have been some of your favorite TV themes? Not that you wrote, though. Like ones that you liked listening to, either as a composer, once you're in the game of composition, like, oh man, I really like that one, or before you even got into it?
I'm bad at this. Just off the head, Thomas Newman's 6 Feet Under was incredible. I lost to the Emmy for that main title to him for a show I did called Wolf Lake, and no one's heard of it, right? So
yeah.
So besides Tom having written the better theme, he had that advantage. And I remember seeing him at the Emmys, and I just know him to say hi. And I said something, "Oh, well, you're going to win." He says, "Oh, no, I don't think so. You wrote something really nice." And I said, "No, you're going to win." And I think Sean Callery's theme to Homeland, which is a great theme, and it's very abstract with sort of cool jazz trumpet influences and stuff is great.
Yeah.
Just some of the really old TV themes from when I was a kid, like, like What's Happening, and when TV themes were, in Car 54, those kill me because they're so great.
Yeah. I was thinking about just TV themes, knowing we were going to have this conversation. And I was thinking about the nature of TV themes, that it should be, it should set up the tone and the mood of the show. But then I went back and started thinking about other shows and themes, and I don't think I ever really understood MASH. Like, there was such a dark, depressing song, but I liked the show. The show was supposed to be like this comedic relief in the middle of the Korean War. Right.
Well, that theme is particularly bittersweet, and it's beautiful.
Right.
And you know what it's called, right?
Suicide is Painless.
Yeah, so they weren't going for the happy thought.
Right. No, not at all. Not at all. But then I was wondering about the juxtaposition kind of on that. Like, we're going to get into Hawkeye wearing a Hawaiian shirt here in a minute, drinking a martini in the middle of the war. But then this kind of like super dark, heavy helicopter scene.
Right.
To set it up. And I was always fascinated by that.
Well, I think that's what made it magical, too. I think they said, like, oh, we don't want to turn off our potential audience by, just showing scenes of war. And
right.
But they very much wanted to make it clear. And I remember hearing or reading about the producers saying the main goal of the show, besides entertaining people, was to show that war is wrong, which is a hard thing to do.
I did not know that, actually. Okay.
I think that was always part of it. And it's just a great theme. And I think that's one of the best of those kind of themes. But a lot of themes were kind of like that, these pretty melodies.
Yeah. Taxi was like that.
Right. So, yeah. And Bittersweet, too.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah. Should do that again.
Yeah.
I also love the theme for Queen's Gambit. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Other ones.
That was a fantastic show, kind of all the way around. I like Jessica Jones, the theme for Jessica Jones. Like, production-wise, they cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time.
Oh, Wanda is great. WandaVision is incredible. And the theme changes. Well, they have two different themes. There's an overall theme that's written by Christoph Beck. And then the two songwriters from Frozen, like, sort of, because that takes place in all these different eras and it reflects the TV themes of those times. There's sort of one that sounds like, Dick Van Dyke era.
Okay.
Different themes. And so both sets of themes are wonderful.
Yeah.
And our co-show on the Peacock Network, Tina Fey's "Girls Five Ever." It's a catchy song. I mean, you're just going to sing with it.
Right. I just heard about that show for the first time the other day. Did you do that? Did you do that show?
Did not, because my husband does.
Okay, there you go. Yeah,
he does, and he's very good.
Yeah,
and he's also the executive producer of most of her recent shows.
Okay,
with her, but. It's a very different kind of humor, because the two shows they shouldn't be compared, but the two original things from the Peacock Network that I know of is Brotherhood Falls, which is the show I do with Ed Helms. Let's talk a little bit about Rutherford Falls, because
let's do
it. These are the producers I did The Good Place with, and I knew they had this other show, but I didn't hear from them for a while. So you figure, okay, they cast different things for different people and different shows, and then I got a call from the producers who said, like, we wonder if you'd be comfortable working with co-writers in this who are indigenous, because that's what the show's about. It's about an indigenous tribe and Ed Helms and sort of the rewriting of history. And I can't really give a log line at it without it making feel either too light or too serious, because it's both. It really has real comedy in it, but it goes through real issues, but it's not like hitting you over the head with issues. It's just part of the people and the cast and the stories.
Sure.
And I think it really grows through our 10 episodes, and the whole cast is brilliant.
I saw that for the first time the other night, actually. I didn't know anything about it going into it, and it was I was surprised. I was in a good way surprised. I liked it.
I don't know how much you've seen, but the last few episodes are really powerful, and it gets more powerful, and it really goes into these issues. And so, it was the pandemic. They said if you'd be interested, we want you to write with A Tribe Called Red, who I'd actually heard their music, and I knew them as a hip hop band. I didn't know that they were indigenous.
Okay.
Really a big part. And if I listened more, I heard them tempt in a commercial, but I looked into the music at that time, and they're great. And I think no one knew how the collaboration was going to work, but it worked great. And Tim and Bear, the two guys who are Tribe, and now they've changed their name. On the day our show came out, for some reason they changed it. They're now called Hallucination.
Okay.
And they're wonderful musicians, and there were 4 producers too, so there were a lot of people who had to sort of come together. And Ed Helms, Mike Scher, who's done everything, The Good Place, Parks and Rec, The Office, all those things he's associated with, and Sierra Ornelas, who is one of the main writers and the showrunner, and she's a combination of indigenous and Mexican herself, and everyone wanted to represent all these different parts of the show, and so maybe I can just explain it, but we started writing main titles both together and separately, and the one that's used actually was the first idea, but it changed a lot, and then there were 22 other ones written.
Oh wow!
And that's just long, and it's you start to lose focus because do they want this? Does this work?
Sure.
There was a period where the 4 showrunning producers, executive producers, each brought in 4 or 5 of their favorite tunes. Which was interesting, but then you try to I'm going to combine all these 24. It doesn't work that way for me, at least. But we learned a lot, and it also helped in the actual score of the show. And themes are usually different. Like the editor said, "Oh, all of these themes are great. We're going to use it in the show." He probably tried, but it really doesn't work. Themes just take too much attention.
Sure,
it's hard to have a show that has that much attention. But a lot of the most successful stuff either would start out with me or start out with Tribe, and then Sierra would say, "It's great, David, but can we, I want to get the Tribe thing on it. Can we run it through their thing?"
Yeah.
And then they would take it for usually a day turnaround on anything at that point, because you have a week to do the whole show.
Wow.
And those are special to me, and they work really well. The music's when they come together that way.
But what do you mean? What do you mean by that way? Like that quickly, or when everybody's kind of on the same vision?
I think the whole was greater than the parts. I mean, they write music. I like the music that I write for it, but the ones that we sort of passed back and forth a couple of times, those are special to me.
Yeah,
and it's sort of representative of the show too, and the way the producers work together.
Sweet. So when you get hired for these, are you hired by the season? Are you hired for the entirety? As long as the show will run, you're the guy?
Yeah, unless bad things happen. But
yeah, that's that, like any gig, maybe. Yeah,
and I've replaced people on successful and non-successful shows, and it's happened to me. And you don't like it.
Sure.
When I got asked to do the final season of Veep, it was a Good Place producer who was also on that show, and I said to him, "These guys do a great job. You should work it out." And he said, "No, it's past that. It's over."
Oh,
and I loved doing that final season.
Yeah,
and they didn't, they still wanted to stay in that same kind of orchestral style, and it was fun to do, and they were great. But usually, hopefully, you're hired for everything.
Sure.
There are shows that have multiple composers. Oh God, I know of shows that because each producer had their composer guy, they ended up doing you do week 1 and 3, and you do weeks 2 and 4.
Okay.
And somehow they found a way to make that work. I've never done that thing.
Yeah, that seems like you would almost have to be like a composition team or something to make sure you're kind of all within the same vein. You don't want to do things that are too drastically different.
I did it for a movie where there wasn't even time. I hired a friend of mine, Charlie Pollard, who's really great, to write the music with me, because there was just had to turn around so fast.
Yeah.
And it would just come in and sound like me, or sound like, there were a couple of pieces that he heard that I had started with or something like that.
Right.
And I never had to go back and say "Oh, this is great, but it doesn't sound like us,"
Right.
So I think it works out that way. And Supernatural is the show that
okay.
Chris Leonard's and Jay Gruska.
Yeah.
It's the father of Ethan Gruska and Barbara Gruska, two of my favorite young musicians. and their grandfather is John Williams, the composer.
Oh, wow.
So they're a very musical family.
Yeah.
And Jay's a great composer, and I've known him for a long time. And that show Supernatural ran for 17 seasons or something like that.
Really? That long?
Yeah, sometimes we've shared a recording engineer, so I got the deets on that.
Okay.
in a good way, that, like, you know, because every year I think I won't talk about another show. But anyway, it was all good.
Cool.
So, yeah. And getting hired is always like a weird experience. Sometimes it's a long auditioning process, and you know you're auditioning against other people, and you either have feedback from them or don't, or you're just guessing. Sometimes they want you to write a cue. Sometimes they want you to write a whole score, and you just don't know. And it's sort of on their terms, the auditioning process, however it is. With The Good Place, it was delightfully different. So my agent called and said, this show, it's a new show, and Mike Scherer from Parks and Rec, and you should go in there and talk to them today. So, you know, I got in my car, headed out to Universal.
Yeah.
And there's usually a lot of them and one of you. So like,
right.
My goal is, please remember their names.
Yeah.
Because you're being introduced, you're nervous and whatever, and you're trying to say what you're going to do on something you know nothing about, you know, like.
Sure.
Right. And that was an odd meeting because we just only talked about Deadwood. They wanted stories about David Milch, and I didn't have many. I didn't last that long on Deadwood, but they liked my story. And then there was one guy in the room who turned out to live on my block, which is really weird, and he's become a good friend, David Miner. And, you know, you go home and you just don't know. You know,
right.
Sometimes you never get called again, or they tell your agent, no, we went in another direction. And there's even meetings where you go and they say, you're the guy, you know, we love you. We love everything you do. This is going to work out great. And then you're not the guy. But this one was the opposite. You know, I think either in the car on the way home or when I got back to my studio, Sarah, my agent, called me up and said, oh, they want you to do the show. And I said, really? Just like that? You know, no audition? No, they're just like that. And
okay.
But the thing was that there was a scene in the opening episode of The Good Place that sort of explains everything, and they couldn't find anything for it. And they're very big on temping, and they found, you know, cool film scores for everything, but nothing was working. So they gave me that as an assignment. And I felt, and maybe it wasn't true, but I felt like if I failed that, I wouldn't have gotten the show. And also, another really unique thing is when you do a pilot of a TV show, the pilot is an audition for the networks. Like most pilots that get done don't get picked up. And so there's so much pressure on everybody, and often inordinate amount of pressure on music, because if they feel the show's not working, what can they change without, you know, reshooting and doing it? Everything, it's music.
Right.
So this was based on the producers and showrunners' reputation. The show was picked up. Okay. So even though we were doing it when everyone else was doing a pilot, we knew that it was going to be picked up. But I didn't know. And so for that, it was very challenging, and I kept on writing stuff and sending it over. And Mike said, "Yeah, this is really good, but it's not that, you know, we don't got it yet, you know." And then after I wrote, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them, he says, "I think if we combine these, take this part for this," and he's very brilliant that way, that we can use this as the for this scene, this one scene. But almost everything that I wrote that was rejected for that one scene became themes that he used everywhere.
Oh, okay.
You know, he'd temp them in there, and I'd go like, "Oh, that works great there. You want me to write it longer?" He says, "Yeah, make it a little different or whatever." But you know,
yeah. So. But that's the nature of it.
Right. Yeah.
Cool, man. Dude, we need to. I want to have you back on the show, and I want to talk more. I have more questions that I want to dig into here, but I'm out of time today.
It's a good one, and hope the audience likes it. And it was great to meet you. And
yeah, dude. You know, if you ever have some free time, let me know. I'll swing by the studio. I'd love to meet you in person. Hang.
Great.
I would play that bass that's behind you there.
Yeah, there's a lot of basses to play here.
Yeah, I'm down. All right, man. We'll be in touch.
Okay, great talking to you.
Bye. Thanks a lot, David. Bye. All right, that was my talk with television composer David Schwartz. Man, Stanley and Jocko in the elevator together. It still trips me out. Yeah, definitely going to have David back on the show. There is definitely a lot more I'd like to discuss with him. You know, the composition world is so intriguing to me, and Yeah, I'm so fascinated by it. Anyways, he'll be back. So stay tuned for that. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider subscribing to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and Stitcher. I believe it's on some other platforms too. Subscribe there as well. Honestly, I don't know how that happened. I only put it on the 4, and then it just ended up on some other places. But subscribe wherever you're listening to it. Any questions or comments, shoot me an email at ryan@thebassshed.com. And that's all I got, folks. That's all I got for this one. I will catch you on the next in a minute.